Tibet, home to an ancient civilization. The Dalai Lama's palace, the Potala, has dominated the Lhasa skyline for more than 300 years. March 2008, the streets of Lhasa are in flames. The biggest uprising since China took control 49 years before sweeps through the country. The Tibetan people remind the world that they are unhappy under Chinese rule and that the Tibet question remains unresolved. Even as the protests break out in Tibet, Tibetan exiles in India set out on a march to their homeland. Their aim, to bring worldwide attention to the plight of their country. The unrest in Tibet occurs just as China is preparing for the Beijing Olympics. The last thing the government wants is negative publicity from Tibet. The Dalai Lama, Tibet's leader, has lived in exile for the past 5 decades, but he continues to embody the hopes and aspirations of the Tibetan people.
I always say Tibetan issue is just issue, a moral issue. And the people who support that issue is not pro-Tibetan, anti-Chinese, but rather pro-justice.
This is a year of dramatic possibilities for Tibet. But as China cracks down hard on his country and frustration mounts among his people, can the Dalai Lama make a breakthrough and finally resolve the Tibet issue?
Following non-violence.
For half a century, the Dalai Lama has lived in Dharamsala, a small town in the Himalayan foothills of northern India. The democratically elected Tibetan government in exile is based here, and the town has become a symbol of resistance against China's occupation of Tibet. On 10th March 2008, Tibetans in exile gather in Dharamsala to commemorate the 49th anniversary of the fall of Tibet. Every year since 1959, this has been a special day for Tibetans, a reminder of the loss of their country and a tribute to those who sacrificed their lives defending their homeland. In the late 80s, in an effort to reach a compromise with China, the Dalai Lama gave up the goal of independence. All he asks for now is a meaningful autonomy that will allow Tibetans to control their internal affairs while remaining a part of China. He calls this policy the middle way approach, but China has consistently rejected his proposal. China's refusal to negotiate seriously with the Dalai Lama has compelled many Tibetans to take action. With the Beijing Olympics fast approaching, a group of Tibetan exiles has decided to use this moment to draw attention to the plight of their country. They will march back to their homeland, despite knowing that they risk arrest and even death if they manage to cross the border. Among the marchers is Tenzin Sindhu, a poet and an activist.
The challenge is to walk every day in hot sun for 6 months, covering almost about 2,500 kilometers. By doing this, we will gather more and more supporters. This march will link the struggle in exile and the struggle that is happening inside Tibet. We are actually challenging the whole might of China's money and military strength.
Before setting out, the marchers perform a prayer ceremony to bring them good luck.
We are gathered here today to start the march to Tibet This march will send a strong message to the Chinese government that Tibetans will rise up and fight the illegal occupation of Tibet until Tibet is free. Free Tibet. Fight yellow! Fight yellow! Fight yellow!
Even as the marchers begin their walk from Dharamsala, a group of monks are taking to the streets of Lhasa to stage a demonstration. This is the first public protest in Tibet for nearly 20 years. This action by the monks sparks an uprising that spreads like wildfire across the Tibetan plateau. In many instances, the protesters display the banned Tibetan national flag. Everywhere, the crowds shout the same slogans. They call for the return of the Dalai Lama and demand independence. In the past, Tibetans have been arrested, tortured, and sentenced to long prison terms for displaying the Tibetan national flag and for raising similar slogans. The extent of the protests catches China by surprise. The Chinese media reports that in Lhasa, at least 18 civilians, including a Tibetan, have been killed in the violence. For the next few months, Tibet is virtually closed to all foreigners, including the international media. China blames the Dalai Lama for instigating the violence.
我们有充足的证据来表明，这是由达赖集团有组织、有预谋、精心策划和煽动。 境内外藏独势力相互勾结，制造的。
When news of the unrest in Tibet hits the world's headlines, the international media descends upon Dharamsala.
Does it mean you support that protest? Protest peaceful way, express their deep resentment. It's right. Right. As far as non-violent principle is concerned, I fully commit it. If Tibetans use violence, follow violence, I cannot agree.
Let me just ask again, sir. Do you have the power to stop them?
I have no such power. Very different. In fact, yesterday I received one sort of call from Tibet. Please don't ask us to stop. So, since I heard that, I got the same sort of mental state which I experienced in 1959 after 10th March in Lhasa. One way, Chinese military determined to crush. Other side, Tibetan side also determined to resist them.
In 1950, soon after Mao Zedong's communists came into power in China, they invaded Tibet. Although their stated aim was the peaceful liberation of Tibet, it was as a conquering army that they marched into Lhasa in 1951. At the time, there were less than 100 Chinese living there. The representatives of the teenage Dalai Lama were coerced into signing an agreement which accepted Tibet to be a part